You know, the Maurits Kiek story, which is called Remembering the Maurits Kiek story, is very special to me because my parents were living in the United States at the time that the fighting was taking place in Europe during World War II. And from my family, there were in fact cousins who had volunteered and were fighting and were serving in the United States Air Force. We're going to stop and try again. You'll see about the fan. Remembering the Maurits Kiek story for me is very, very important, especially today, where one could ask, what is the relevance of World War II and the type of fighting, the resistance of civilians that took place against Nazi occupiers who were really evil doers when it came to brutality and annihilating people, not just the 6 million Jews, but also the gypsies, those who were handicapped, anybody who didn't meet the Aryan standard of perfection, they killed. And to put one's life at risk as a civilian in order to save Allied airmen who were shot down and allow them, help them to evade the Nazi occupiers and then create an evacuation route for them to then go across back to England to fly another mission, to continue to fight for freedom. It's a memory, it's lessons that need never be forgotten. Even if today you're to suggest, or anyone were to suggest, it's a different frame of reference. We don't have the same type of tyrants, the way you had a Hitler or a Mussolini. Granted, but you have the rise of neo-Nazism in the world. You have extremism. You have religious violence, intolerance. You have those who are calling for the extermination of people. And we've seen this with the fighting. Look what happened in Rwanda. Look what happened, between the Hutus and the Tutsis. And people have not learned to respect each other, to live with each other. And here in Indonesia, where the Indonesians did not experience the horrors, the brutality that Europeans did. World War II for Indonesia was a very different sphere of action. It was with the Japanese. The Japanese were not wonderful, but they weren't creating concentration camps where there was the systematic annihilation and extermination of people. The Japanese were not wonderful, they were not good, but they didn't have gas chambers and crematoria to do away with their perceived enemies. So for Indonesia, the story, the narrative of World War II is very different than the narrative for the American or the European. To be able to screen Remembering the Maurits Kiek story in Indonesia, to expose a population of people to this storyline at a time when Indonesia is at risk from those who are radicalized, those who would like to impose their will on others, where you do have terror, where you have churches being blown up, where you have, even in Jakarta, you've had a bus station that was targeted, a Starbucks, a cafe that was targeted, where there is no respect for the value of a human life by others. For me, this was an important screening that I hope will continue throughout the Republic. And I must tell you, I applaud wholeheartedly the Indonesian censor who made the determination to allow this documentary to be screened at Planet Hollywood and to be shared with the Indonesian population older than 17 years of age. Because if we're going to change, if in fact the lessons of World War II with regard to trust, with regard to standing up against evil and not being silent, are to be learned here in a country where it was not part of the narrative of World War II. The people, the next generation, all need to be exposed. So I feel blessed that I was given this opportunity to be able to share this story here in Indonesia. You know, Elie Wiesel, who was a Nobel Peace Prize winning author, also a Holocaust survivor, at the time that he received his Peace Prize, he challenged all those who were listening in his audience by saying that remembering is really a noble act, an essential act, because if we don't remember, then we have the potential to repeat the mistakes, the flaws, the tragedies that occurred in the past. When somebody leaves remembering the Maurits Kiek story, I hope that they will think about what they need to remember. What can each individual do to make a difference? That if they remember, they might improve. Either it's the quality of their lives, the quality of other families and their lives, and promote respect, dignity, and civility. And when one is exposed to evil, when one is exposed to messages of hate and intolerance on the social networks of today, don't be silent. Don't simply be passive. Because if you're silent, if you're passive, if you don't respond and stand up and be heard and challenge he or she who in fact is promoting the prejudice and intolerance, then you are setting up a scenario by which there could be a reoccurrence of tragedies that we have seen since the days of the Holocaust. The Cambodian killing fields, what has occurred in Nigeria, what has occurred in the Balkans. Time and again, man goes and kills another without any concern for the other. Iran has most recently, in its rhetoric, has also called for the killing, whether it's the Yazidis or others. Where is the outrage? Where is the protest? Where is that next generation who's online? They need to speak out. And if they don't, then they very well might lose their own dignity and humanity. And so really that's my hope, that when you watch the documentary, you'll be challenged to think in your own terms about what resistance to evil means with regard to you and your life. Each of us has the ability to respond. We must not waste the opportunity.
Okay, Cheryl, how many awards have Kiek received so far? If you can count it.
You know, this documentary, the Maurits Kiek story, Remembering, was first released in January of this year. So it is really a very short period of time that it has been available to even be screened. I am so overwhelmed by the response to the documentary. The Dutch, to remember Holocaust Remembrance Day, chose to screen the documentary as a standalone for this very important day of remembrance. The Dutch Broadcasting Company, comparable to America's Public Broadcasting Corporation, asked that they be given the privilege to put Dutch subtitles to the documentary and then air it later this year for the country. That's not an award, but I would suggest that is even more impactful and meaningful than a film festival award. After that, again, a screening at the Cannes Film Festival, a very prestigious industry film festival in France. And there, the documentary won an award and was screened and was applauded by a diverse audience, those who were there seeing it from Africa, as well as those who were in attendance from the Middle East and from Europe. To be able to then look to Indonesia, where, again, a screening in the capital of the country with Bahasa subtitles, that is so important, and it allows people to see the film, but more importantly, to understand it. And yes, there have been other festival selections. It will be screened in the UK, in Westminster. It will be screened in Amsterdam in September. It will be screened and be screened. It's going to be screened at NYU, at a prestigious university, come the fall semester. So there's really no simple way to count awards. What I can say is that in the short time since the documentary has been released, it has made an impact beyond anything I could have imagined in so few months.
Cheryl, do you want to add anything to the Kiek, or do you want to move on to the...
Well, let me think about that. Do I want to add anything to Kiek? There's an important piece to Maurits Kiek's story that really is important for today. Maurits Kiek was a young man. He was only 23 years old, and yet he had a determination to fight injustice. So much so that he went and escaped, where he took a plane that he had to go from Switzerland to France. He stole a locomotive to cross from France into Spain, and then he had to go get a visa to go across to South America, to Brazil, up through North America to Canada, to then get across to England. And when he was in England, he went to the Dutch intelligence, and he thought he would be able to participate as an intelligence agent. And the Dutch really did not want a Jewish spy serving with them. Their attitude was, you know, given what's going on to the Jewish community in Europe, you've got to be either crazy to want to be dropped back behind enemy lines, or you can't be trusted. Maybe you're a German plant to infiltrate our intelligence services. And he refused to take no for an answer. And he then went to the British intelligence services, and they said, "We want you." And he became an MI9 agent. And he did put his life at risk, and he was captured. And there was a death sentence that had been placed on his head. But he survived, and he saved airmen. He made a difference. That message has got to be shared with the young generation today. You're not too young. You're never too young to make a difference. What you need to be is committed. You need to be willing to stand up. You need to be willing to be heard. Challenge where you hear or see injustice. If you don't, then you yourself could be the next to be hurt, the next to be put in prison, the next whose civil liberties will be denied. And the young generation of today really need to learn from this young man, Maurits Kiek, of yesterday. I was very fortunate to have parents who taught me that we each have an obligation to do for each other. The ethic of reciprocity, the golden rule. So the manner in which I have chosen to follow their inspiration is really through my storytelling, my documentaries, which have allowed me to interact with people around the world. And I really have chosen to focus on the children with whom I have engaged around the world. In the United States, I was able to co-chair an organization that focused on language called Words Can Heal. In Ethiopia, I was able to focus on the illiteracy that really created a class distinction between people and create a illustrated children's set of books so that storytelling and lessons and heroes and heroines could inspire them. When I came to Indonesia and my documentaries were being screened here, I had the ability, the privilege of meeting with children who were dancing, children at parks, children who respected a national motto which celebrates unity from diversity. And at a time when so much of the world is challenged with violence, with intolerance, with prejudice, I was so inspired by this national motto. And then I read, back in the United States, news stories about intolerance, that the lives of these children were being put at risk by others who were radical in their beliefs. And I just could not let that go unanswered. And I decided, given my background, I was going to try to make a difference. And together with friends here in Indonesia, specifically the Dimatra family, we created a Vision of a Peaceful Tomorrow initiative. And this initiative is focused on young people ages 5 to 18 to encourage them to express their vision of what can a peaceful tomorrow be? Can it even exist? And use every art modality, whether it be drawing, poetry, dance, song, film, whatever they choose, to allow them to express themselves and to go to different towns, cities, villages, and engage with the schools, with children who are in orphanages, and to let them know that what they perceive, their vision, is important because they are the vanguard of the future. And we need to give them the confidence that if a radical adult comes into their world to say that peace is inappropriate, that a commitment to radical beliefs is to be the priority, they need to know they have got a resource, they have got people who will stand with them, applaud them, and give them that support to make a difference in their home, in their school, in their community, and as they mature in their country. And so that is the motivating history of how a vision for a peaceful tomorrow involving Indonesian youth came to be.
3.